Africa trades with the East and the West. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic brought about disruptions in the business supply chain, with the airports shutting down and business grounding to a halt. Africa has no choice but to look inwards and develop homegrown solutions. To delve further into this topic, I will be speaking to Joram Mwinamo, a celebrated mentor to entrepreneurs and startups in Africa. Joram Mwinamo is a management consultant, coach and motivational speaker who is passionate about Africa and even more passionate about seeing how people achieve the greatness that is inherent in them while enabling them to have global influence in business, education, and life. Joram's work in organizational strategy has seen him work with SMEs, corporate enterprises, and multinational organizations across 9 countries in both Africa and Asia. His unique insight into the private, social, and public sectors were the inspiration behind Sandbox, an innovative one-stop shop for supporting SMEs that delivers sustainable business models localized for the African ecosystem. Joram is actively involved in mentoring startups and is a global mentor for Impact Startup Program in Berlin, Germany. He also sits on the board of Amnesty International Kenya. Welcome to Power Thursday. Welcome to Power Thursday. As analysts talk about the effects of COVID-19 on Kenya, statistics are mostly based on the urban areas. For example, there are discussions on the Nairobi Security Exchange indices. There are discussions about, food price rocketing up, mostly in Nairobi, transport costs going up. And I think it's because the assumption a lot of times is that people living outside Nairobi are not paying rent, have food in their farm, so their life might be a bit easier. But are they better cushioned than the rest of us who live in the city and in the capital?
Well, I wouldn't say they're necessarily better off, and I'll give you a few examples just from Nairobi. I think you've been able to see vehicles parking, outside Wayaki Way with produce inside.
Yes.
People, the biggest market for any food products is Nairobi itself. So you have a lot of people who grow food, who, keep cows for milk and all this, but their biggest markets end up being in Nairobi. And so you'll find that the cost of doing business has gone up because, one, you have to go through all these hoops of getting licenses, getting approved to be able to travel, being able to just come into the city and bring your produce. You have to get some kind of certification. And then there's restrictions on movement. So you can't, move all the time. So I would say there's definitely been like a disruption on the supply chains, especially those, geared for export. So we have flowers, things like avocados, we have people having excess supplies in their farms and do not know what to do with it. They're selling it at a throwaway price.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think it's not just an urban issue. I think we are all affected equally across the board. But you could say that, yes, if people grow food for subsistence and then they may be a bit better off, they don't have to pay rent. In Nairobi, people, have to negotiate with landlords or be kicked out, if they are not able to afford that rent and they don't own the house. So I would say the challenges are different. The rural challenges are very different from the urban ones. You also have the urban areas being the ones that were more hit by COVID. So that's where they've been locked down, and you find that that's where the biggest challenges are, because you have restaurants closing down, you have certain businesses out of business, like travel businesses. So I would say nobody has been spared by COVID, and whatever effects you're going to see are going to be across the board.
So viewers, if you're following this live, please remember to use the hashtag Power Thursday. The hashtag is Power Thursday, and please feel free to send in questions that you have for Joram, and we will definitely share those questions with you, and you will get the answers right here live on Power Thursday. Now, this is the second term. Kenya is now in its second term of the new constitution that came up with counties and allow counties to be able to share resources as they see fit. Did it put Kenya in a better place, and are counties a bit more prepared for a disruption such as this one?
I actually shudder to think what would have happened if we didn't have counties during COVID. I think we've seen impressive leadership from some of the county leaders, Mombasa, Makueni. I think Machakos also launched something. Kakamega is about to do so. So there's all this COVID preparedness that happened down at the county level. People increased capacity for testing that complements the national government's capacity. People were able to, some infrastructure had already been built, and this infrastructure now ended up becoming useful during this time for COVID. So I think, I keep saying devolution was a brilliant thing. It may not be perfect. There are some quarters that think it is expensive, but I really wonder what would have happened if the COVID situation was being managed centrally, you remember we had provinces, and making sure that PPEs for doctors and everything is getting down to the ground. Of course, I know that the medical fraternity may not have been very happy in how some of the things have been handled, because health has been devolved in Kenya, and then it depends on how organized your county is for you to see efficient or well-organized response towards COVID. But I would say that the national government and the local governments have actually to a large extent done a good job trying to complement one another to deal with this.
And one of the things that we've seen the Kenyan government do is seal off Nairobi, and therefore reduce interaction or people coming in and out of Nairobi over the last 1 month, and the president recently added another 30 days. How is that going to affect the different counties that are outside of Nairobi and locked out of the capital city of Kenya?
Yeah, so I think counties that rely on Nairobi for its primary markets, and that's largely counties that surround Nairobi, and a few that maybe, produce products that you cannot find near Nairobi, whether it's potatoes or onions or that kind of thing. So those who primarily rely on the Nairobi market and their supply chains have been disrupted may see some kind of disruption to how they do their business. They may see their cost of doing business going up. And then those counties that rely on supplies from Nairobi as well, or talent, or I think we've had Kenyans who usually travel home maybe every weekend to go and, see their small farm and how it's doing. Those Kenyans have been unable to travel. There are those who travel to see their parents in the rural areas. They've been unable to travel. And usually that comes with being able to support them financially or take something from Nairobi for them to use. And also then you have, maybe some people have lost their jobs in Nairobi and they're not able to, or they're on a reduced salary, so they're not able to support people back in the rural areas as much as they used to. So you find that Kenya's economy has this symbiotic relationship between the urban areas and those in the rural areas who kind of, sustain one another. I go visit my mom, I come back with a sack of potatoes. When I'm in Nairobi, I send her M-Pesa and those kinds of things. So you find that some of those things may have been disrupted. I've had people complain they've not been able to visit their relatives for a long time. Some of them maybe have been sick, and then also because of COVID restrictions, they are stuck, or they have to protect the vulnerable because they cannot go and see them. They might, take the infection there. We have an extra 30 days, but they did some incremental, changes where they added 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, where people are allowed to move around the curfew. I think it was probably wise that they did not just go for a full reopening, because we've seen the cases have been going up in the last few weeks, so that's not likely to stop. But also, I think the government is in a very difficult position where they have to balance the economy and the disease and how it's affecting people and also killing people. So everyone is walking a tightrope, from the government balancing how things are happening in the economy, to people who have lost their source of income, or their source of income has reduced significantly. And as of now, it has pushed it another 30 days, but we are not sure. If cases go up, we might have it extended, or they might find a different way of mitigating what it is that's happening. So I think people were hopeful and thought that it would be 3 months and we are done. But I think we should be prepared for a very gradual reopening of the economy. I've seen some announcements that we may have flights resume and these kinds of things. And I think we will see gradual reopenings of some of these things so that the economy can start moving again, because right now there are quite a number of industries that have just come to a standstill.
Yes, you're sounding a bit confident there, Joram, talking about, flights might reopen. But again, WHO says that we might have to live with COVID-19 for probably another 2 to 3 years. So nobody really knows when it's going to end. And we might see the Kenyan government, forced again to probably lock out Nairobi for another 30 days once again. But are we likely to see a situation where if this happens for too long, then other counties might begin to realize, hold on, we probably don't need Nairobi as much as we thought we did?
Yes, and you're quite right with that. COVID has forced not only counties, but countries to look inwards. You will note that before COVID happened, and it actually started in China, which is where all our manufacturing, in a sense, used to happen, or a large percentage of our manufacturing. But because of, when China was shut down, people had to look for certain things locally. I actually have a friend who runs a company where he was making soaps and sanitizers. And, at this point, he's making a killing because people are not able to import and they need them. And, it's a regulation, you have to have them in establishments and these kinds of things. So you have a lot of people looking inwards for sanitizers, for things like PPEs, this personal and protective equipment. A lot of it is now being manufactured locally. So you may also have counties that are locked out of the urban areas saying, if we continue like this, we may die or lack certain things. So why don't we think about setting up industries that, produce some of the things that we need on a day-to-day basis that we have previously relied on other counties to produce. But to some extent, I also see that, such introspection is good because it has finally, we've seen maybe more than ever, the government looking to purchase inwards, to do the local purchasing that we were always crying about because a lot of things, tend to be imported. But now, locals have had their chance to prove themselves and have their day. So you may find that by the time this is over, and if you're saying 2 to 3 years, we may have built the muscle in some of these industries to even supply other parts of the world. And that also, I think, gives opportunities for us locally.
And I like the example that you've given of the hand sanitizer and locals being able to now prove themselves. And hence the reason why a lot of people have been saying that, COVID-19 could be the great economic equalizer. But at the same time, if you look at the situation that we have in Kenya, a lot of schools, private schools, especially in Nairobi, have opened up thanks to Google and also thanks to Zoom. But that unfortunately cannot happen beyond Nairobi, where some towns don't even have electricity, and we can't even then begin to talk about even internet penetration. Is COVID really going to be, for counties, the great economic equalizer, or continue to further widen the gap?
Yeah, so I think there'll be winners and losers in COVID. Unfortunately, the kids in the public schools are going to be the losers. I was talking to a friend of mine who was part of the Ebola response in Sierra Leone, who was mentioning that they had to close schools there for 2 years. Can you imagine? Children had to learn through radio and other electronic means. Of course, it was unideal. But one of the things that happens is that you find the population that ends up being advantaged in this case is, small. And what will then happen is that it will disadvantage everyone who's within the public education system or the 844 system. And so you're going to have an entire generation that will have a story to tell about the time when they had to stay out of school and they were all disadvantaged, and when they came back they had to catch up. I think in my lifetime I remember several times when there were teacher strikes, even in years when we had exams, and I think we turned out well. So I would not think it's too drastic if it's something that's happening to everyone across the board. However, it would be good if we had ministry officials and people within that education space trying to find solutions that are workable across the board. Like I said, it could be radio lessons, it could be a way of making sure people continue to be engaged, even if they're at home in an inexpensive way, just so that you can keep the learning going. Definitely, it's causing disruptions as well with parents, because it's affecting productivity. If parents have to be at home being the teachers, then you find maybe they're not as productive at work as they would have hoped to. But again, it's a once in a 100-year occurrence. I don't know that we can beat ourselves so much about the fact that this has happened. It was unforeseen. It's unlikely to happen in our lifetime, even if we take another 2 to 3 years to get out of it. But I am certain we will learn how to live with it. It's a bit of a maybe almost even careless thing to say, but I think people are coming to terms with the fact that they'll just have to find ways of coexisting with COVID, and maybe we will find ways of avoiding it as we go along, or minimizing its effects. Maybe a vaccine will come up soon. Like, there's all these maybes. I remember when the AIDS pandemic came about, everyone was afraid that we were all going to be wiped out. But people eventually found ways of protecting themselves and educating themselves around the disease, which is really where our efforts now should be. That even as we reopen, let's not drop the ball on the education that needs to happen for places to stay safe, and for things to continue, even if not at 100%, they could be at 50%, and we are better off than closing completely.
And as you even talk about ways of living with COVID-19, what are some of the alternative economic opportunities that have been brought about by COVID-19?
I think if I start by thinking globally, one is we have some geopolitics that's happening in light of China, and you find now a lot of companies or countries that used to manufacture in China are rethinking that, because the downtime they had was quite debilitating to their balance sheets, and everyone is thinking twice around, why are we manufacturing everything in one place? So you have a lot of people asking questions around, are there alternative places where we can manufacture? I think a lot of people are looking at Africa, some are looking at South America, others are looking at other parts of Asia other than China. So it could be an opportunity if we had our government move quick enough to address some of the factors of production. We could be one of the centers, because when you typically think about how companies do risk management, they don't want any big thing that they do to be centered in one place such that they're shut down. So you'll find them maybe splitting their manufacturing by 3 or 4 times. And so we could be one of the locations that can do that. Also, for some of the things we are now producing that maybe other countries out there don't have the capacity to do so, we can export to Africa this PPE equipment, these sanitizers, and some of these things, and people can use the profits they make now to maybe deepen their expertise on creating even better products that can compete with things that have been coming from other parts of the world. I think slowly, if we get flights resuming, people might have had that cabin fever for so long that they want to go out on a holiday somewhere as long as, they're assured that it's safe. And then if you come locally, you find that other than the local manufacturing, one of the other industries we've seen thriving during this time is things like the IT industry, where because a lot of companies have been forced to become digital, to take their operations digital. Many of them, especially those maybe run by older people, may be completely clueless, and you find that providing an opportunity for younger people who are more technologically savvy. I even saw an announcement for somebody advertised being able to help people hold webinars, where they come and do everything and you just show up and they run it for you, and you pay them for the service. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would be able to take up a service like that because they feel either time has bypassed them and that kind of thing. So again, if it was to persist for a little bit longer, I've seen some positive, some negative sentiments around the fact that people are now targeting the local market because the international market is not available anymore. And you might find that a trend like this persists because, especially like the tourism industry, you find that they only turn and look inwards when the international stop coming. But then you ask yourself, why don't you target us through and through? Is there something about us not being able to patronize your establishments and these kinds of things? So you'll see some of these industries grow on the basis of that. There's a projection that we may only grow by 1% instead of the projected 5 to 6% that was there before. The amazing thing in that nobody's talking about is that we are still growing as an economy. I mean, it still means that there are certain aspects of the economy that have improved. If you look at certain sectors of the Nairobi Stock Exchange that you are talking about, some people are still making record profits, the banks, the telcos, and those kinds of people. So if we see any significant negative effects, it's maybe if it stays for too long because people are now taking measures to conserve cash. But I think that the opportunities that will come after in terms of growth and for that the trajectory that we were on is likely to continue in a very big way. So I don't see us taking as long to recover as some of the other countries out in the West.
Yeah. To my final question, say you were a governor of a county. At this time, what incentives would you give entrepreneurs?
I think one of the most important things for people to understand about an economy is that you cannot afford to have things come to a complete standstill.
That's true.
You cannot afford to have people not having money in their pockets and therefore not having purchasing power for things to continue. And that's why you see a lot of bailouts in a lot of other parts of the world were structured along giving like some money, a certain amount of money that can help people run maybe for 2 or 3 months, helping pay salaries for people who are out of a job, for also it may be reduced salaries, but at least somebody continues to get something. Or giving interest-free loans during this time to the businesses. The most important thing is to make sure that if you have businesses in your county or even country, is that you keep them running. Find a mechanism to keep them running. A lot of counties have databases of registration of who's running businesses in their counties. They can decide to put a fund aside. Part of it can go as loans that can help people stay open. Part of it can go as, some kind of subsidy or some money that's passed on to keep things going. If they have opportunities to purchase from certain industries as a county, and maybe they are buying from outside their county, this would be a good time to purchase some of the excess produce that might be coming from their counties. So the most important thing is just to keep things going as long as possible so that you don't have an extended period of time where people don't have money in their pockets, because that now opens you up to many other issues. People don't have food. In this country, we tend to have a relation of crime with being broke. So it's to keep things moving. And, I think many of them have advisors where they can look at many different ways where they can repurpose some of their budgets. What's the point of doing a project that, doesn't keep things going, or by the time it's over, you have a lot of businesses having shut down. So it could be time to repurpose some of those budgets for supporting their businesses.
Thank you so much, Joram. That was 3 seconds of, some of the incentives that you would give us as a governor. That's probably the closest you will ever get to politics. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us and speaking to us about, Africa now looking inwards and looking at the different challenges that we're facing in Kenya and in Africa. And we look forward to having you on this show again.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to be here.
Well, that was a lively conversation, you must say. We've answered your questions. We have discussed about the different opportunities. And I do like one quote by Churchill where he said, "Do not waste a crisis." And we just gave you a few solutions so that you do not waste this crisis. And join us next Thursday for more as we talk about opportunities in Africa during COVID-19. Have a good week.